My nerves are bad tonight. Yes, bad. Stay with me. Speak to me. Why do you never speak? Speak. What are you thinking of? What thinking? What? I never know what you are thinking. Think. I think we are in Rat's Alley, where the dead men lost their bones. What is that noise? The wind under the door. What is that noise now? What is the wind doing? Nothing again, nothing. Do you know nothing? Do you see nothing? Do you remember nothing? I remember those are pearls that wear his eyes. Are you alive or not? Is there nothing in your head? But that Shakespearean rag, it's so elegant, so intelligent. What shall I do now? What shall I do? I shall rush out as I am and walk the street with my hair down, so. What shall we do tomorrow? What shall we ever do? The hot water at 10, and if it rains, a closed car at 4, and we shall play a game of chess, pressing lidless eyes and waiting for a knock upon the door.
You are obscure, you know, said Geoffrey Faber to T.S. Eliot of his recent poem, The Wasteland, a poem that had made Eliot famous in some circles, infamous in others, and by all accounts placed him at the zenith of literary acumen. And that was precisely where Geoffrey Faber wished his new publishing firm, Faber and Guire, to be. And so, in 1925, he tempted Eliot from a seat at Lloyd's Bank to become a publishing director of Virtue. Because, despite himself, Geoffrey knew that there was never obscurity in Eliot's thinking. The purpose of a poetry list, said Eliot sagely, was to lose its company as little money as possible. But with Faber's, he said, where poetry should be the chief glory, there was also a moral duty. It is a responsibility towards society that such a firm should do something for English poetry by publishing the best poetry written in our time. To do that, a company must acquire prestige, he said, and prestige comes from two achievements alone. One, having picked the right authors of the past, and two, in his words, going on guessing about the younger generation. And so Eliot became, he said, a talent scout, a role for which he read exhaustively. He kept a dossier on new poets of any promise and made their entrance test robust. Most would fail at the first time of asking. Some he encouraged to write more, others to write less. Some not to write at all. With typescripts, he was artisan, cutting out weak poems, reordering good ones, coming up with titles, and the part he found hardest of all, writing the book blurb for the inside flap. His editorial style was one of ferocious languor, incorruptible, unhurriable, a principled skeptic in total command of his publishing. And by 1929, the newly named and independent Faber and Faber was poised to change the century of poetry. Tonight, we'll celebrate that moment in this special Faber Members event with 12 poets whose work has made its mark in this 90th anniversary year. We'll interweave our evening with archive recordings, and we'll hear from Zafir Kunial, who will gift us subtle poems from the boundary of the cricket oval. Hugo Williams will share brave, acute lifelines from a hospital ward. Julia Copus will bring us writing of grace, grief, and lasting poise. Ilya Kaminsky will urge us to stand, take action, and consider what it is to be heard. Paul Muldoon will remind us why he is beloved as one of our most original voices of the era. But 2019 began with a special announcement that a debut had won the prestigious T.S. Eliot Prize for Poetry. That poet is Hannah Sullivan, and it is with her, as well as Eliot, that our evening begins. So, sit forward, make yourself uncomfortable, and enjoy the marvel. Please welcome Hannah Sullivan.
Thank you. It's really an enormous honor to be here. I'm going to start by reading the opening of the first poem in this book, 3 poems, You, Very Young in New York. Rosie used to say that New York was a fairground. You'll know when it's time, when the fair is over. But nothing seems to happen. You stand around on the same street corners smoking, thin-elbowed, looking down avenues in a lime green dress with one arm raised, waiting to get older. Nothing happens. You try without success the usual prescriptions, the usual assays on innocence. I love you to the wrong person. I feel depressed, kissing a girl, a sharpener, sea urchin, juice cleansers. But the senses laxly fed are self-replenishing, fresh as the first time. So even the eventual sameness has a savor for you. Even the sting when someone flinches at I love you is not unwelcome, like the ulcer on your tongue wetted on the ridges of a tooth. And when he slams you hard against the frame, the poor ticked, sallow bruise seems truer than the speed, the spasm with which you came. So nothing happens. No matter what you try, the huge, lost innocence at which you aimed recedes, like long perspectives, like the sky square at the end of Fifth, whitening at dawn, unseen, as you watch the unlit cabs go by. All summer the park smelled of cloves and it was dying. Now it is Labor Day and you've been sleeping through a rainstorm, half aware of the sewage and frying peanut oil and the ozone rising in the morning heat and the sound of your roommate hooking the chain, flipping ice cubes into a brandy balloon, pouring juice over them, ruby sanguinello till they giggle, popping their skins. The freezer throbs. He has been beating a man he met on Craigslist. He has been dreaming. Old New York, a James novel, a Greenwich Village Christmas, a certain kind of frost in the meatpacking district, and the smell of the carcasses dull with the tang of freezing blood beside the skip of the Hudson wind. You have been thinking of the building opposite at night, the lights going off, one by one, a diminished Mondrian, one ochre square where a woman undresses for the city, stroking her puffy thighs. You hear him talking on the phone about you, his petite innocente. All summer you have been eating peaches from the green market. Overripe in September, they need to rest in the icebox, sitting with their bruises. All summer, you have been dreaming of fall and its brittle confection of branches. And from Central Park to Feeding the Pigeons in London, the poem I'm working on now is set in London in 2017, in the immediate aftermath of the fire in the Grenfell Tower. I'll read two sections from Tenants. On dry grey days, we went to Holland Park. The little children's playground was revamped. It cost £1 million and looked the same. I found a bench and sat there with my pram, unravelling a racetrack from a Chelsea bun, the baby on my lap, for safety, sniffing him, addicted to his warm, sweet, yeasty smell, soft plaques of cradle cap, lavender Sudocrem, the buttered popcorn of the breast milk nappies. I was absconding from the life that I had had, committed to being small, nut-like, enshelled. I threw some soddled raisins to the birds. Some of the pigeons slept, their heads tucked in, a pile of steel ball scourers for the sink. The others gulped at crumbs beside the bins or picked the breast meat off a fallen crow. The cavity they left was smooth and clean, like something you could use to scoop ice cream. To walk into the flat where it all started and see the fridge, the square, it had no depth. It would have crumbled under water jets. To walk out of the bridgehead into dawn. Outside, this incandescence, neither green nor yellow in the gardens. June, the birds. The traffic on the Westway was still sparse and stately as the drivers rubbernecked. To say the caller's name and hold the line, to keep the caller there until the end, to walk into the almost longest day, the tinnitus of silence after sound. Outside, this incandescence in the gardens, the sprinklers turning in the garden squares. Thank you.
It's a real joy to be here in this company, and it's great to have this pamphlet 6, and it's subtitled Cricket Poems. And I'm not saying this just as a kind of sales pitch, but it's not really about cricket. I think it's about time and kind of divisions of time. And I was thinking of Shakespeare's Sonnet 60 and 60 seconds and 6 ball overs, and 6 as a kind of halfway position on the clock. And we'll begin with a poem about a lost cricket ball. It starts in Birmingham, where I was born, and it ends in Yorkshire, where I live now. Fielder, if I had to put my finger on where this started, I'd trace a circle round the one moment I came to, or the one that placed me, a fielder, just past the field, over the rope, having chased a lost cause, leathered for 6, when, bumbling about, obscured in the bushes, I completely stopped looking for the ball, perhaps irresponsibly, slowed by bracken, caught by light, that slipped the dark cordon of rhododendron hands, a world hidden from the batsmen, the umpires, and my team, like the thing itself, that small seamed planet, shined on one half, having reached its stop out of the sphere of sight. And when I reflect here from this undiscovered city, well north of those boyish ambitions for the county, maybe later the country, I know something of that minute holds something of me there beyond the boundary, in that edgeland of central England, a shady fingernail of forest. The pitch it points at or past a stopped clock. Still, in the middle, the keeper's gloves clap at the evening, Still a train clicks on far-off tracks, and the stars are still to surface. The whole field, meanwhile, waiting for me, some astronaut or lost explorer, to emerge with a wave that brings the ball, like time itself, to hand, a world restored. But what I'd come to find in that late hour was out of mind, and the thing is, I didn't care, and this is what's throwing me now. I'm going to read a poem called Over, which is another division of time, I suppose, and traditionally an umpire will drop 6 pebbles into his pocket to one by one to count the balls. Over. It's nothing really, just the way it is, or was said, on the heels of me getting into my stride. That oval, long held, oh, then I lifted skyward, burr, after the last short drop of the stone in hand to the white coat pocket. I still hear, over, over, far from that pocketed day, lost to the weather on a loud grey beach, taking a blind soul step away from the creased sea, when my boot heel knocks back a shell or a whitened pebble that might just as well be a wisp or the lonely thought that I haven't connected to anything. And I'm going to end with a poem called Prayer, which is from Us. And I usually end with this poem. And I've just realised that all the titles have at the end: Fielder, Over, and Prayer. And actually, is probably a sponsoring sound of this poem. There's lots of in it, and maybe her as well. There's Hereford and hurt, and the word heard, and it quotes from George Herbert. Prayer. First heard words delivered to this right ear. Allahu Akbar, God is great, by my father in the Queen Elizabeth maternity ward. God's breath in man returning to his birth, says Herbert, is prayer. If I continued his lines from there, from birth, a break Herbert chimes with heaven and earth, I'd keep in thought my mum on a Hereford hospital bed and say what prayer didn't end. I'd say I made an animal noise, hurled languages hurt, at midday when word had come, cancer, now so spread, by midnight her rings were off. I stayed on at her bed. Earlier, time and rhythm flatlining, I whispered, thank you, I love you, thank you. Mouth at her ear, she stared on, ahead. I won't know if she heard. Thank you.
What is our innocence? What is our guilt? All are naked, none is safe. And whence is courage, the unanswered question, the resolute doubt, dumbly calling, deafly listening, that in misfortune even death encourages others, and in its defeat stirs the soul to be strong. He sees deep and is glad who accedes to mortality, and in his imprisonment rises upon himself as the sea in a chasm, struggling to be free and unable to be, in its surrendering, finds its continuing. So he who strongly feels behaves, the very bird, grown taller as he sings, steals his form straight up. Though he is captive, his mighty singing says, satisfaction is a lowly thing. How pure a thing is joy. This is mortality. This is eternity.
Hugo Williams. Got a couple of poems. First one's called Dear Arm. I thought I should explain a phrase in it called access fistula, which is they have to make, if you're going on dialysis, you have to have a hole made in your arm so they can tie up a vein to an artery. So this poem is a sort of thank you note to the old arm for putting up with it all. Dear arm, how many times, dear arm, have you put yourself in danger for my sake? How many times have you found your way home through the dark or saved me from falling? I didn't have to ask you twice. Poor arm, I broke you once. I burnt you once. More than once I cursed your weakness at arm wrestling and swimming. But I was proud of your tan when I rolled up my sleeve at school. You aren't so handsome now, but you soldier on, one of the faithful in my band of volunteers, my noble standard bearer in the war, within a war, the daily clash of purposes. Dear arm, hold still for me now, while I make you suffer once more. Be brave, while the surgeon creates an access fistula that will wash my blood for me. It seems you must save my life as usual. This is called the Sorrow Club, which is in my new style, which when I showed it to people, everybody said was the same as my old style. The Sorrow Club. Once, long ago at night, I was excited by rain, lighting the streets for murder. Was it too late, I wondered, to do something stupid with my life? Perhaps I was going to die myself one day. But no. Looking into the future was like opening a thermometer. I wanted to go out, of course, in order to come home, but not too far. A walk on the wild side meant crossing the street occasionally to applause from the audience. Proceeding against my will, I obstructed my own path. I failed to look after myself. My fault was wandering about in a series of night moves. I was paying attention to cherry blossom petals trapped in the patterns of manhole covers. Faces without features tore themselves to pieces before my eyes. A reflection of my feelings or their cause? What was it that spoke to me like this in the language of ribbons? What trail of mischief fell from my hand to bind me to itself? I was looking for an ending in the tangle of streets and thoughts when I noticed a quivering thing tethered to a railing. She told me to meet her at the Sorrow Club, where a bad man greeted me with sarcastic applause and blows. I turned round fast and heard the click. Little beads of mercury were running around in the gutter. Shadows fell from my blood. They carried me shoulder high through the night. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Julia Copus. I seem to write a lot about experiences that appear to separate us from those around us, but in fact they are universal. And I suppose that's the irony of them. They actually connect us. And grief is one of those experiences. The grievers. At length, we learned what it meant to come to grief, as if grief lay in wait for us all along, a barricade or boulder in the road. What was it pulled us to it, led as we were to its cold stone smell, its granite skin? We knew it by the way the light had shrunk to a frayed corona. In increments, we understood there was nothing to do but swallow it whole and inch our way forward again. But to find we were able, that was the miracle. It was as if the soul, which has no definite shape, consisted simply of a flexible cell wall. In grief, the soul distorts and forms a seal around the loss. What we can't absorb, we carry in us, a lumpish residue. It's truly a wonder we manage to move at all, let alone as freely as this, with the ease at times of our old and lighter selves. And when I say we, look out into the street. We are everywhere, on bikes, at bus stops, among the crowds of those who have not happened yet on grief. We steady our own like an egg in the dip of a spoon, as far as the dark of the hallway, the closing door. Some of us are there even now, in the dusk that gathers behind doors. We are catching our breath, convinced we won't be joining you again, surprising ourselves at the last, because we do. Creation myth. And there's a quotation at the beginning. On the narrow ridge where I and thou meet, there is the realm of between. Martin Buber. In days where you were not, I went as the crazed but duteous bee goes to its tasks. My words were moths caught under glass. My thoughts fleet as a spring shower, and you were nowhere. Not in all those days when I, as a long-limbed girl, started from school for the witching hour of home, willing the road on, and fear slowed, dawdled, while the barley field in my eye's corner, the left eye, shimmied and stilled at the wind's whim. And again you were not there later, in the many hard-shadowed bedrooms of almost strangers, there least of all. Though if Buber had it right, an inborn thou was all the while stretching a white root into the earth of me, stepdaughter, scholar, sister, lover, all the many ways the world had then for making sense of me, my life. My story went on telling me, at any rate, I was being told. Some story, a brief flirtation with the voguish north, afternoons where I sailed under a slick umbrella calmly on to one chore or another, until desperation had me questioning the choices I had made. Is it possible I might have made a go of things after all with him? Or him? Hadn't I thought so at the time and sworn by it? But in the unknowable meanwhile, the sunlit length of garden where we'd meet, how far from then forethought of, had shrunk to a year away already, just a year. Its warm brick walls. Then it was weeks only, days, till at last I blinked and stepped, or yes, was drawn, for something did stir in me, inborn or no, at the sight of you. You'll get the moment I mean from my having told it so often, the breezy shiver of birch leaves at your shoulder, your voice and the blue of your jacket, the kindlier blue of your eyes, stepped, as I've said, without thinking, onto the narrow ridge of our beginning, and became. And this is the last poem I'll read, and it's called Stories, after Marie Howe. Think of a night in midsummer, a night with water falling to a pond from the raised mouth of a freckled stone seal, and children up late calling to each other 2 or 3 gardens away, and under those a softer murmur. So lies the past, no further. You do not need to get up and stand on tiptoe at the hedge to know that what you hear are the people you love. You suppose the stories I've told are over. Think of the garden. You sat there so long, the dew had settled on the grass, on the yellow pistils of the irises, the children's hair. Their laughter was made of the same air that moved as a breeze across you. And the dew, likewise, was bits of sky, nestling where it could, and all of it, although you could not touch it, was part of you, was what the summer night contained. Thank you.
Water wanted to live. It went to the sun, it came weeping back. Water wanted to live. It went to the trees, they burned, it came weeping back. They rotted, it came weeping back. Water wanted to live. It went to the flowers, they crumpled, it came weeping back. It wanted to live. It went to the womb, it met blood. It came weeping back. It went to the womb, it met knife. It came weeping back. It went to the womb, it met maggot and rottenness. It came weeping back. It wanted to die. It went to time, it went through the stone door. It came weeping back. It went searching through all space for nothingness. It came weeping back, it wanted to die, till it had no weeping left. It lay at the bottom of all things, utterly worn out, utterly clear.
Hello. It's an honor to be here today. My name is Ilya Kaminsky. As you might have noticed it by now, I speak with a very heavy Russian accent. So hopefully by the end of this 24 hours that we'll spend together, you will all also speak with a very heavy Russian accent. But just in case you want to follow, good people at Faber have placed the poem right behind me. It's called We Live It Happily During the War. We lived happily during the war. And when they bombed other people's houses, we protested, but not enough. We opposed them, but not enough. I was in my bed. Around my bed, America was falling. Invisible house, by invisible house, by invisible house. I took a chair outside and watched the sun. In the 6th month of a disastrous reign, in a house of money, in a street of money, in a city of money, in a country of money, our great country of money. We, 40 hours, lived happily during the war. Let's not clap. These are just poems, okay? So what I'm going to do next, two little pieces I'm going to read out from Deaf Republic, which is a story universe about a pregnant woman and her husband in a time of crisis. They watch a soldier shoot and kill a young deaf boy at a public gathering. And as a result of that murder, the whole town decides to protest by refusing to hear the authorities. So it's a fable, a fairy tale in verse. It has both lighthearted moments and not lighthearted moments. The first one is a sweet moment called Before the War, We Made a Child. Before the war, we made a child. I kissed a woman whose freckles arose the neighbors. She had a mole on her shoulder, which she displayed like a medal for bravery. getremde lips, men kwam to bed. Geheer, worden vallen in the middle of the conversation, men kwam to bed. I woke in my barber shop of thoughts. Yes, I see it her off to bed on the chair of my hairy arms. But parted lips, man bite my parted lips, lying under the cool sheets. Sonia, the things we did. And then later on in the book, things get a little more complicated. So the next poem is called The Townspeople Watch Them Take Alfonso. The townspeople watch them take Alfonso. Now, each of us is a witness stand. Vasenka watches us watch for soldiers. Throw Alfonso Brabinski on a sidewalk. We let them take him. All of us, cowards. But we don't say. We carry in our suitcases, our coat pockets, our nostrils. Across the street, they wash him with fire hoses. First he screams and he stops, so much sunlight. A t-shirt falls off a clothesline, and an old man stops, picks it up, presses it to his face. Neighbor just told to watch him drown on a sidewalk like a vadimilak, tada! In so much sunlight, each of us is a witness stand. They take Alfonso, and no one stands up. Our silence stands up for us. Thank you.
And Shaw. When the master was calling the roll at the primary school in College Lands, you were meant to call back Anshaw and raise your hand as your name occurred. Anshaw meaning here and now, all present and correct, was the first word of Irish I spoke. The last name on the ledger belonged to Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward, and was followed, as often as not, by silence, knowing looks, a nod and a wink, the master's droll, but where's our little ward of court? I remember the first time he came back, the master had sent him out along the hedges to weigh up for himself and cut a stick with which he would be beaten. After a while, nothing was spoken. He would arrive, as a matter of course, with an ash plant, a sally rod, or finally the hazel wand he had whittled down to a whip lash, its twist of red and yellow lacquers sanded and polished, and altogether so delicately wrought that he had engraved his initials on it. I last met Joseph Mary Plunkett Ward in a pub just over the Irish border. He was living in the open in a secret camp on the other side of the mountain. He was fighting for Ireland, making things happen. And he told me, Joe Ward, of how he had risen through the ranks to quartermaster, commandant. How every morning at parade, his volunteers would call back Anshaw. and raised their hands as their names occurred. I realized to my horror earlier that my first publication by Faber and Faber was in 1972, which is more than 45 years ago, more than the half mark of this anniversary that we're so thrilled to be celebrating with you tonight. My first editor was Charles Monteith, and in 1977, after my second book came out, and it was out of print actually quite soon after that. God knows how many they've printed. But I said to him, Charles, what about reprinting this book? And he looked at me and he said, oh no, I don't think so. What we're going to do is you're going to write another book. And then you'll write another book. And then we'll do your selected poems. And then after a while, we'll do your collected poems. So I said to him, Charles, I think I'd better go home and get started. But in any case, I tell that story because it gives some insight, I think, to how it was, and I think actually how it is at Faber, and we're all thrilled to be part of this evening. I'm here as a kind of, I don't want to say the Irish backstop, but I do represent a kind of hard border between Acts 1 and 2. And I read that first poem partly because I need to remind myself, if no one else, what can go wrong when we start building borders. So this next one also refers to that. I'm going to end with this. Thank you so much for having us all here this evening. The Boundary Commission. You remember that village where the border ran down the middle of the street, with the butcher and baker in different states. Today, he remarked how a shower of rain had stopped so cleanly across Golightly's Lane. It might have been a wall of glass that had toppled over. He stood there for ages to wonder which side, if any, he should be on. Thank you.
Even the most gifted poetry editor, wrote Eliot, must be content that it is impossible to be sure of genius at first sight. So when Eliot told an unknown undergraduate that he was not ready for publication, but would follow his work he did. And 3 years later, in 1930, that young writer would become the first debut on the poetry list. The poet's name was W.H. Auden, and his delicate lyric verse would be joined by that of Louis MacNeice and Stephen Spender at a moment that a modernizing wave was electrifying the offices at Faber's. Ezra Pound, James Joyce, Marion Moore, Wyndham Lewis, David Jones. Contrast was energy and a document upon the time, said Eliot. What you want to be able to say confidently to your readers is that this is representative of the best that is being written by men and women of their generation. The poetry list boomed after the Second World War, which Eliot spent as a fire warden on the roof of the company offices. When the opportunity arrived to sign a peerless young Yorkshireman called Ted Hughes, Eliot moved with urgency. I'm inclined to think we should take this man now. Eliot's health began to fail in the 1960s, and his charge was taken up by Charles Monteith, who published Sylvia Plath and Philip Larkin and Paul Muldoon at Faber's for the first time. Seamus Heaney likened being asked by Monteith for his manuscript to getting a letter from God the Father. Eliot would be modest in retirement. He had published some good books, he said, and spared readers from some bad ones. And best of all, he no longer had to write so many book blurbs. In truth, by the century's end, his poetry list housed 7 Nobel laureates. It was a home for giants, but also a hearth for younger voices, those he once admitted to guessing. Today, a diverse and skillful generation open another chapter in Faber's pages, 9 new poets in the past 2 years alone, who will help us to remember Eliot's plea for renewal, that next year's words await another voice. In our second half, you will hear the deep pooled elegies of Christopher Reid and a cultural revolution recast by Mary Jean Chan. Joe Dunthorne's poems will sidle up to you on a sofa of snacks and sitcoms and strange examinations. Rachel Allen will animate the darkness. We'll conclude our evening with the pure, sharp dignity of Lavinia Greenlaw, and with the great voice of our moment, our poet laureate, Simon Armitage. But we first return to our archive and the unmistakable voice of Sylvia Plath.
I have done it again. 1 year in every 10 I manage it, a sort of walking miracle, my skin bright as a Nazi lampshade, my right foot a paperweight, my face a featureless, fine Jew linen. Peel off the napkin, O my enemy. Do I terrify? Yes, yes, Herr Professor, it is I. Can you deny the nose, the eye pits, the full set of teeth? The sour breath will vanish in a day. Soon, soon the flesh the grave cave ate will be at home on me, and I a smiling woman. I am only 30, and like the cat, I have 9 times to die.
Yep, that's me. I'm going to read 2 poems. The first of them being from the anniversary part of that book. Scattering was published 10 years ago, but in the meantime, the death of, the anniversary of the death of my wife, who's the subject of a scattering, fell, and I felt I needed to write some poems to mark that that moment. And so there are 10 of them, and I'll read just the one, The Lion of Lemnos. they're anecdotal. They all address Lucinda, my wife, and they remind her of things that we enjoyed together, or that I saw her do, and so on and so forth. But the Lion of Lemnos is this particular one. Who pushed the tumbler? I can't believe it was you. Neither of our guests looked the likely culprit, and it certainly wasn't me. No, we were in earnest. Well boozed, but in earnest, as the upturned glass, uncommonly roused and headstrong, slid, paused, edged away, hesitated, and pounced from letter to letter in answer to our questions. We had got through to a certain Miss Lomax. First name, dates of birth and death undisclosed, but speaking to us, albeit with difficulty, from somewhere in the middle of the 18th century. She wanted to tell us about the Lion of Lemnos. Some old wrong, or shady business, or misunderstanding concerning it and the British Museum. But what precisely? She couldn't or wouldn't explain, however hard we pressed her. Our pestering flustered her and threw her into deeper and more frequent silences. We had lost her attention, her trust, and she was withdrawing. What put it into your head then to ask her about next Saturday's lottery numbers? I remonstrated. Our friends laughed. The game was over. Diffident Miss Lomax and her mysterious lion had fled, to remain with you now, unreachable on the far side. If anybody knows anything about the Lion of Lemnos, which I'm sure exists, it can't be Googled, but it must exist. That is the evidence. I'd be very glad to hear from you. Now, quite different. This is a poem called Molly, a Dog of the Night, from Old Toffer's Book of Consequential Dogs, which is a book I was asked to write to fill in the huge gap that Eliot left when he failed to write a book about dogs. And it was great fun to do. And I've got lots of favourite dogs within the book, but this is one of my very, very favourite, Molly, a Dog of the Night. Most dogs are larks, but a few are owls, by which I mean to say that for every 999 who favour the light of day, there's always one who will wait till it's dark before running out to play. Though a dog of the night is a rare enough beast, I'm a trusted friend of one at least, and the tales she tells of her nocturnal strolls through parts of town overrun by trolls and other monsters you'd not care to meet, crouching towards you down some dark street, are apt to make my hair stand on end out of fear for the safety of my dear friend. Molly herself is quite without fear and will not renounce the habit. As a lurcher who since puppyhood has done for many a rabbit, her first response to any threat is to give chase and to grab it. So, when all the rest of the family are snug in bed as they should be, and Molly, no longer pretending to nap, has scampered to find the secret gap through which she can wriggle out for her walk, yes, I know where it is, but I've sworn not to talk, and let me repeat, I'm a trusted friend. Any troll that comes grumping round the bend will know that she's famous for speed and bite. And the worst he will do is to snarl a polite, "Hello, Molly,"
Have a nice night.
But now, you're probably dying to ask, how does Molly fare with the ghosts and ghouls and other ghastlies that whoop through London's night air? The simple fact of the matter is that nothing gives her a scare. If a headless duke comes flitting by, she'll look him steadily in the eye, the one peering out from the crook of his arm, for how could she possibly come to harm from something as flimsy as a ghost? A slight embarrassment at most to catch him carrying his own head when a page should be doing that instead. Vampires, as they hurtle past, silently and very fast, on their way to nipping people's necks, slow down to pay her their respects. Likewise, their cousins, the acrobats, while cat burglars and burgling cats pause from their nefarious pursuits, and actual owls send out sweet hoots as she proceeds on her patrol. The whole night world has welcomed Moll. Even the moon and stars above peep through the murk to show their love. Thank you.
My name is Mary Jean Chan, and I'll be reading to you all from my debut collection, Flesh. Practice. As a teenager, fencing was the closest thing I knew to desire. All the girls swapping one uniform for another before practice, their white dresses replaced by breeches. I thought we were princes in a fairy tale with a twist, since there were no princesses to be taken, wed. As knights, we were told to aim for an imaginary spot just above our opponent's left breast. Often, I left a bruise, the blade's tip ricocheting off chest guards onto skin. Just as often, I would feel yellow blooms of ache where the girl I thought was beautiful had pierced my heart. Hours later, I would transform. I would head back home with a deepening sense of dread, my bruises fading to quiet. A wild patience has taken me this far, after Adrian Rich. I am writing in the voice of my most hopeful self. Amnesia was my daily bread. Thank God for fan fiction, for it gets better, for poets audacious enough to mention the body. Do you know what camouflage looks like on a day-to-day basis? Checking the coast is clear before opening a single tab and multiple decoys on a screen. Surreptitiously reading Shakespeare, the scene where Cesario woos Olivia. Watching my parents' faces for a sign to hold a tidal wave back. A daily prayer for the strength to confess nothing at all times. One day, it becomes a choice to walk out of this life or to begin living mine. I left half of my language behind to escape my impeccable persona. How I wanted to perform a heroic act to gain acceptance into the kingdom of ordinary people. To love a city and to not have it love you back is its own form of torture. When I met a beautiful stranger for the first time, I was deeply afraid of her tenderness. An appointment with a therapist led to a second date. I was given permission, needed permission. She held my hand till I began to comprehend the territory of skin, its frantic heart and silent ponds. Most nights, I dream of my mother's face, by turns harsh and tender. In a nightmare, I shouted at her, "Neither you nor I are the enemy." What do mothers ask their own daughters everywhere in the world? Is there a question? Ask me something. I'll end with a slightly more lighthearted poem. It's about tea. The importance of tea. When your aunt arrived, she asked for normal tea, which, to my untrained ears, sounded a bit like normality. In Hong Kong, normal tea is green or white or red. It took my mind several moments to move from green to white to red to land on black. Your aunt was flexible. Any Assam, Darjeeling, or Earl Grey. We only had matcha, some loose-leaf iron Buddha in the cupboard, no milk. Your aunt looked at you as if you'd failed at being British, me as if I'd failed to properly assimilate. Afterwards, you said I was projecting onto your aunt the fears I harbored. No matter how many years I've spent in this country, how I interpret normal tea, what is normal to me. You are learning Mandarin Chinese. I see how the characters are split for you. Signifier and signified refuse to conjoin. That's what happened when your aunt asked for the normal tea. Days later, when a waiter brought us white sugar for our oolong at a cafe, I caught your gaze. We laughed and left the sachets unopened. Thank you.
The trees are coming into leaf, like something almost being said. The recent buds relax and spread. Their greenness is a kind of grief. Is it that they are born again and we grow old? No, they die too. Their yearly trick of looking new is written down in rings of grain. Yet still the unresting castles thresh in full-grown thickness every May. Last year is dead, they seem to say. Begin afresh, afresh, afresh.
Hello. It's a great honour to be here. It's a great honour to have Philip Larkin as my support act. So I'm going to begin with a poem that is about a father who is worried his daughter is falling in love with some owls. It's called Owls in Law. These birds have no idea how to behave, pouring glasses of water for just themselves, regurgitating pellets of compressed bone, and now landing on my daughter's arms. As she laughs, their apertured eyelids click. When she asks which of them are single, their lighthouse smiles sweep the room. That night, I watch my daughter sleep. I'm at her bedside, there in the eaves. As she starts to dream, her eyes toil in their sockets. I warn the owls not to mistake this twitching for field mice and pluck them out. I know from research the power of their zygodactyl talons. Their wings are silent when they descend, claws now trimmed and tagged with commitment rings. Her eyes stay shut as they grip her clavicles, rising gently between rafters. They hide in a darkness to which my sight cannot adjust. I listen for her cries, but hear only deepening breath. So I'm going to read a handful of really short poems in this book, which is called O Positive. There's 8 of these 5-line poems. I'm just going to read a few of them. Even though they're not strictly linked, I'm going to read them consecutively. And I should apologize to my dad, who's in the audience. I can't. Dad, where are you? I don't know. Anyway, sorry. You'll know why. So here we go. I decided to stop therapy because I was perfect. And how might your perfection appear to others? Classic, my therapist, missing the point completely. At 33, I finally had the dream where I made love to my mother. I kept saying, "You are my mother," and she said, "I absolutely am." Then she phoned my father and told him everything. Though the officer finds no bales of dope gaffered to my lumbar, the tender way he thumbs my waistband suggests he is seeking other lives, that only my kind hips might diffuse the bar fights I see teeming in his eyes. "How are you, co-worker?" "I feel the same," I yell, loud as a drawer of hotel cutlery. "Exactly the same." My mouth so wide they can't avoid my fillings made of grey amalgam, my feelings made of gold. "Your lips are lovely," by which I mean love me, by which I mean babies, big ones. "Let's have ones that laugh even though they cannot walk. Let's have one a month. I think I'm finally ready." At last, I am chosen for extended security. The man passes his wand across my groin. "Wow," the wand says. "Wow." "That's my soul," I explain, as he pulls wide my buttocks, admires the tuft of cling film, a small pale flame. So I'm going to finish with the last poem in the book, which is called After I Have Written My Important Poem. After I have written my important poem, I will write one about skiing, because where are the decent skiing poems? And some light verse for my friend's brother's civil ceremony, even though I do not much like my friend's brother, but you can't say no to these things. Then a long one about jambes lourdes, heavy legs in French, a condition from which only French people suffer. And though the poem may start as satire, it will slowly attain a terrible empathy. For are we not all girded to every flaw, etc.? The reader suddenly pinned to their seat with compassion for the hypochondriac French, despite the billion euros they waste each year on special creams. And the poem will say, surely if we can understand, I mean truly feel the imagined heft of their legs, then we can love one another absolutely, which the reader will buy into, their critical faculties by this point hopelessly diminished, leaving me free to turn the poem's final lines to Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon, released from the limbs that bind us to the earth. Buzz Aldrin, running like how we run in dreams. But first, thanks very much.
Hello, my name's Rachel Allen. I'm going to start with a poem about uncontrollable desire that descends into violence inevitably. Promenade. Openly wanting something, like the opened up lungs of a singer, I walk by the carriage of the sea and the vinegar wind assaults. Is this an age of promise? I blush to want. If I were walking around with you, arm in arm, along some iron promenade, you could fill me up with chocolate, you could push back my cuticles with want. I'll just lie down, my ribs opened up in the old town square, and let the pigs root through my chest. My second poem, Kingdom Land, is the title poem of my collection, and it came about through some of my favorite lines in poetry, which are from Lorca's The Moon poems. And those lines are, at the rise of the moon, bells fade out and impassable paths appear. The dark village sits on the crooked hill. There is a plot of impassable paths towards it, impassable paths overcome with bees, the stigma that bees bring. There is a bottleneck at the base of the hive. There is an impassable knowledge that your eyebrows bring. Beside the poor library and the wicker man, there's a man who sells peacock feathers on the roundabout. They scream all night from where they are plucked. The village is slanted, full of tragedies with slate. I am walking towards a level crossing while someone I love is jogging into the darkness. Come away from there, I am yelling while the black dog rolls in the twilit yard. Small white socks bob into the dark like teeth in the mouth of a laughing man who walks backwards into night, throwing drinks into the air like a superstitious wife throws salt. We all have our share of certainties, the glass and salt, my petulant daughter, the glass and salt, my crooked pathway, impassable glass and salt. The next poem I'll read is about the complicated, complex dealings with choosing to eat animals and choosing not to eat animals. And it's also about turducken, which is the most monstrous form of an animal I've ever encountered, which is a chicken stuffed into a duck, stuffed into a turkey. Many bird roast. I came in, dandy and present, arguing for a moratorium on meat of the kind splayed out on the table, legs akimbo like a fallen over ice skater skidding on her backside. There are dogs in the outhouse and all over the world that we do not eat. And one small sparrow, in a pigeon, in a grouse, in a swan that we will certainly eat, overlooking all the drama, with as many eyes as a spider that will cut in two. And the compacted layers of the various meats will collapse away dreamily as a rainbow melts down into the marsh where it came from, slipping meat from the bone onto a specially designed knife. There's a call out for plates. I'm the only one with a sense of outcry. Someone says, "You weren't like this when it was broiling away, smelling like your history, smelling like the deep skin on your knee after playing in the sun all day, skinned with good dirt and your underblood just showing through, smelling like warm, dry furs after burning and the outdoors after fireworks and Novembers after tea. You eat and smell like the rest of us, dirty rat under your armpit, dirty bird in your stomach." And birds fell down the chimney with thwacks into buckets, and we got so poor we had to eat them too, strange cockatoos, and once a brilliantly lit, pure white dove that we kept in a hutch with a small pot of ink, and when we let it out, it wasn't so much a raven as just a plain black dove, ready to cook, and with superstition I learnt to. And I'll finish with one small poem. The indigo field. Two bees hang around a severed horse's head, forgetting that they're supposed to pollinate flowers instead of the roughly opened gland of a mammal. Black pennies with cow faces down a black well. You stood no chance of being born, I tell myself, as the sea cannibalizes. It manages to forgive itself every day without visions of the baby making her way towards me across the indigo field. Thank you.
When all the others were away at Mass, I was all hers as we peeled potatoes. They broke the silence, let fall one by one, like solder weeping off the soldering iron. Cold comfort set between us, things to share gleaming in a bucket of clean water, and again let fall. Little pleasant splashes from each other's work would bring us to our senses. So while the parish priest at her bedside went hammer and tongs at the prayers for the dying, and some were responding and some crying, I remembered her head bent towards my head, her breath in mine, our fluent, dipping knives. Never closer the whole rest of our lives.
Going to read two poems from a version of Chaucer's Troilus and Crusade. Basically a story of two people arguing themselves into and then out of love. A prayer. For lovers, for those who do not remember, for those who do not recover, for those trapped in another's gravity, for those in love with love's certainties, for those who forget what is fixed must break, for love to be more than for love's sake. If he ever fears he might not win her, he falls into some inward place of trees, refusing any path that does not make of itself the right answer. Hope will emerge, like a gentle creature, drawn from green shadows to steady his gaze. A fawn, soft in the wild, followed only by more of its kind. This is a poem from a series about my father's disappearance into the present tense with Alzheimer's. My father tells me to wait. When I arrive, he's eating, and I'm told to wait, to let him finish, not to unsettle him. I wait. When he finally sees me, it's as if he's been brought to an open door and made to peer into a dark night. He's afraid to ask who's there. What if someone's there? He'd have to invite them in and accompany them through time. He peers at me, and the space between us extends itself so that I am where he wants me, out there in the dark, in a place without stars or fathers, and he raises his hand and says, "Stay there, stay there." And I'll finish with an elegy. Flowers for GT. I would have met your pain with my body and lain with you as in the hours of our youth, with all youth's ceremony. I would have taken you back to our first walk at dawn across a borrowed town, wakeful, speechless, and amazed by new feeling. I would have met you in love, instead of in what you feared of love, which I feared too. We would not have been so young. The day I heard of your illness and its end, white flowers in the lane were shaking out their brightness. They could not stop shaking. Perhaps we should have just kept walking, beyond dawn, beyond town, beyond desire and fear and death and pain, beyond the bright flowers shaking. Thank you.
Thank you for waiting. At this moment in time, we'd like to invite first-class passengers only to board the aircraft. Thank you for waiting. We now extend our invitation to exclusive, superior, privilege, and Excelsior members, followed by triple, double, and single platinum members, followed by gold and silver card members, followed by pearl and coral club members.
Military personnel in uniform may also board at this time. Thank you for waiting. We now invite Bronze Alliance members and passengers enrolled in our Rare Earth Metals Points and Rewards Scheme. Please come forward and thank you for waiting. Thank you for waiting. Accredited beautiful people may now board, plus any gentleman carrying a copy of this month's Cigar Aficionado magazine, plus subscribers to our Red Diamond, Black Opal or Blue Garnet promotion. We also welcome Sapphire, Ruby and Emerald members at this time, followed by Amethyst, Onyx, Obsidian, Jet, Topaz and Quartz members. Priority lane customers, fast track customers, chosen elite customers, preferred access customers and first among equals customers may now also board. On production of a valid receipt, travelers of elegance and style wearing designer and or hand-tailored clothing to a minimum value of $10,000 may now board. Passengers in possession of items of jewelry, including wristwatches, with a retail purchase price greater than the average annual salary of a mid-career high school teacher are also welcome to board. Also welcome at this time are passengers talking loudly into cell phone headsets about recently completed share deals, property acquisitions and aggressive takeovers, plus hedge fund managers with proven track records in the undermining of small to medium-sized ambitions. Passengers in classes loam, chalk, marl and clay may also board. Thank you for waiting. Mediocre passengers are now invited to board, followed by passengers lacking business acumen or genuine leadership potential, followed by people of little or no consequence, followed by people operating at a net fiscal loss as people. Those holding tickets for zones rust, mulch, cardboard, puddle and sand might now want to begin gathering their tissues and crumbs prior to embarkation. Sweat, dust, shoddy, scurf, feces, chaff, remnant, ash, pus, sludge, clinker, splinter and soot. All you people are now free to board. It's a fundraising event once. I read that poem to some super rich people and they had no idea what I was talking about. All goes on back there. This is a poem called To-Do List, which is presented as a list with bullet points. I don't really know how to pronounce a bullet point. You just have to imagine it's there at the beginning of each line. So the voice in the poem is full of anxiety about the pace of modern life or concerned about being left behind, and occasionally expresses this through an obsession with Donald Campbell and his various attempts to break various speed limits. To-do list. Sharpen all pencils, check offside rear tire pressure, defrag hard drive, consider life and times of Donald Campbell, shampoo billiard room carpet, learn one new word per day, make circumnavigation of Coniston Water by foot, achieve grade 5 piano by Easter, go to fancy dress party as Donald Campbell, complete with crash helmet and life jacket, draft pro forma apology letter during meditation session, check world ranking, skim duckweed from ornamental pond, make fewer apple-to-apple comparisons, consider father's achievements only as barriers to be broken, dredge Coniston Water for sections of wreckage, lobby service provider to unbundle local loop network, remove all invasive species from British countryside, build 1 to 25 scale model of Bluebird K7 from toothpicks and spent matches, compare own personality with traits of those less successful but more popular, Eat brackets optional, breathe brackets optional. Petition for high-speed fiber optic broadband to this postcode. Order by express delivery DVD copy of Across the Lake, starring Anthony Hopkins as Speed King Donald Campbell. Gain a pecuniary advantage. Initiate painstaking reconstruction of Donald Campbell's final seconds. Polyfiller all-surface cracking to Bonneville Salt Flats, Utah. Levitate. Develop up to 4,500 pounds force of thrust. Carry on regardless despite suspected skull fracture. Attempt return run before allowing backwash ripples to completely subside. Open her up. Subscribe to a convenient one-a-day formulation of omega oil capsules for a balanced and healthy diet. Reserve full throttle for performance over measured mile. Relocate to a dynamic urban hub. Eat standing up to avoid time-consuming table manners and other non-essential mealtime rituals. Remain mindful of engine cutout caused by fuel starvation. Exceed upper limits. Make extensive observations during timeless moments of somersaulting prior to impact. Disintegrate. Thank you very much. Just finish with this poem. Finish the evening with this poem. It doesn't really have an ending. I was trying to do a kind of fade out, which isn't really available to you as a writer without getting into all kinds of typographical nonsense. So just have to. If Paul's reading at the end of the first half represented the hard border, I think this represents the never-endingness. Zodiac t-shirt. The avenues marching with combat shorts, the pavements strutting with micro skirts. No rest from the sun, a smothering heat like a mother beast asleep on its young. Zodiac t-shirt, paperclip bracelet, Mercury rising, calling the crash team. Knock for knock and tit for tat. Your bike got nicked, so you nicked one back. We pull up a tree and plant a rose. Where a cigarette dies, another one grows. Zodiac t-shirt, paperclip bracelet, Mercury rising, calling the crash team. Hand in hand when the bendy bus stopped, a couple got on, a couple got off, and an ice cream wept on the steps of the church, and the crusted up reservoir died of thirst. Zodiac t-shirt, paperclip bracelet, Mercury rising, calling the crash team. Drink for drink in the park that night, me scratching yours, you scratching mine, till the words came thumping hand over fist, and the sky blew a fuse, and it started to piss on your Zodiac t-shirt. Paperclip bracelet, crucifix pendant, cinnamon toothpaste, chewing gum pavement, licorice protest, dragonfly heartbeat, daisy chain necklace, candy stripe shoelace, finger bob Jesus, pregnancy dipstick, all back to your place, body bag suitcase, Mercury rising, cardiac jump leads, calling the crash team, calling the crash team, calling the crash team, calling the crash team.
Thank you for being with us this evening. In a moment, after our final recording, I hope you may thank all our poets and the estates of all our poets for their support with our evening, and the Bloomsbury Theatre for our stage. course, in our end is our beginning. And we leave you with the briefest of lines from that foundational poem with which we opened, The Wasteland, and its famed scene from a Kensington pub to which soldiers have come home after the Great War.
You are a proper fool, I said. Well, if Albert won't leave you alone, there it is, I said. What you get married for if you don't want children? Hurry up, please. It's time. Well, that Sunday Albert was home. They had a hot gammon, and they asked me in to dinner to get the beauty of it hot. Hurry up, please. It's time. Hurry up, please. It's time. Good night, Bill. Good night, Lou. Good night, May. Good night. Ta-ta. Good night. Good night. Good night, ladies. Good night, sweet ladies. Good night. Good night.